This week in groups, John really picks up the pace. The action really begins again as Jesus walks to his death. Do you remember how John had paused the action at the end of chapter 12? We were in that chapter a couple of months ago, so let me just remind you. We've had all this talk, haven't we, of Jesus walking towards his death, as John's mentioned this hour. And the whole of John has been a kind of countdown to this hour of glory, this hour of Jesus' death. We've been counting down all the way up until chapter 12, verse 23, where Jesus then said, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." It's as though the countdown had stopped and the alarm clock had started ringing at the end of chapter 12. We'd arrived at the hour, we were expecting everything to suddenly kick off, and yet we hadn't quite arrived. John had grabbed the remote and he pressed pause on the action. And chapters 13 to 17, well, that was one long conversation that Jesus had with his band of disciples. And the long conversation ended last week with one long prayer from Jesus to his Father. But now in chapter 18, as I say, we're back to the action. John's grabbed the remote again and he's pressed play, and Jesus goes to his death. And from this point on, everything really does start happening very, very quickly in the narrative. As you get stuck into this wonderful passage this week, let me give you a few recappy things that I pray will help us to really think hard about what the action is teaching us. So first of all, you'll want to think where we finished when John last grabbed the remote to press pause, where we finished in chapter 12 with all this talk about Jesus' death and all this talk about it being a glorious death, a death that brings life. You'll want to think a little bit about that now that John's grabbed the remote again and has pressed play. But you'll also want to think about where we landed last week. That was the study we had just before this one. Well, last week ended, didn't it, with, you could say, one loud amen, because Jesus had just finished a long prayer to his Father. He prayed an epic prayer about the future, a prayer full of glory, a prayer full of protection, asking for protection for his disciples, and a prayer that asks for help as they bear witness to Jesus in the world. And so what do you expect to happen next? What do you expect to happen after having said one loud amen? Well, one way or another, I guess you expect answers, don't you? You definitely expect to see answers if it's the very Son of God who's praying to his Father. And so as the action begins, again, tonight or through this week, don't just think about where you left the action in chapter 12. Think about what Jesus has just been praying as well, and ask, how am I beginning to see answers to that in this passage? Have fun in the beginning of John 18 this week.